Welcome to the LIPI Library Podcast, where we discuss all things South Asian literature and translation. In this episode, our founding engineer Samyukta speaks to Professor Asokan, a professor of computer science and avid translator of Sri Lankan Tamil stories.
Hi, Professor Ashokan. Thank you so much for meeting with us, with the team at LIPI. We're so grateful for this opportunity. And like through the power of internet, just to meet someone who has a equally a big vision for translation and South Asian stories. This is definitely a really good opportunity to share with the world about what we think. So maybe I thought we could just start with a short introduction about who Professor Ashokan is and how did the spark of translating as your passion project start?
Okay. It's really nice to meet you, Sam. Not face to face, but online after a long time. So my name is Ashokan. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Waterloo in Canada. So by training, I'm a technologist. But for a long time, from my childhood, I have been interested in reading and literature in general. I'm from Sri Lanka. So in Sri Lanka, we language of medium of education is Tamil. So until I went to university, I studied everything in Tamil. So I started reading in Tamil. And then from university onwards, I switched to English. So my kids were born and brought up in the West, in Finland. But also my sister's kids were born and brought up in Canada. And we are not unique. As you know, Sri Lanka went through a civil war, so there's a huge diaspora in Western countries, and the second generation, and now even the third generation is growing up in the West. So these are kids who know about our culture because they absorb by osmosis from their parents and relatives, but they, especially in Anglo-Saxon countries where English is so dominant, the kids who grow up here don't actually learn to speak Tamil, let alone read or write. It's different in other European countries, in Germany and France and so on. The kids who grow up there, the diaspora kids who grow up there do speak Tamil. Perhaps it's a little bit of a colonial vestiges, like parents in English-speaking countries value English so much, whereas perhaps their parents in non-English speaking countries don't. But the end result is that many of these kids, especially in Anglo-Saxon countries like the US, Canada, UK, Australia, they are the culture, but they are not able to read. And I felt that meant that an entire world is closed off to them, which is the world of Tamil literature, and specifically the literature from the place where their parents came from. So this is what led me to try translating Tamil stories by Sri Lankan writers into English so that at some point when these kids want to know about where their parents came from, they would have access to this world. So, in fact, I first translated a story by a writer called Muthulingam. A. Muthulingam is a very well-known Sri Lankan writer. In fact, he's much better known in Tamil Nadu, in India, than in Sri Lanka. And his first story, which was written 60 years ago, is about my mother's village. He's from the same village as my mother. And it's very, very evocative, very descriptive story. So I started translating that. Then I translated his entire collection. And then I translated some stories from my father's village. So that's how I got started. Since then, I've translated other authors, typically Sri Lankan authors from the north of Sri Lanka. But increasingly, I also, once I started translating, I also realized that this is my original target audience, which is the kids growing up in diaspora, are not the only ones. I think anyone who is interested in the Sri Lankan culture but are not able to read in Tamil would be an audience. So people in India, people in Sri Lanka who don't speak Tamil and so on. And it can work in the other direction as well. So I also translated stories from the East. In the East, there's a big Muslim population. So I've translated stories from a Muslim author in the East, which describes a life that I myself am not directly familiar with, but I can recognize because I grew up in Sri Lanka at that time. Perhaps
Thank you.
that's a introduction to start with.
Yeah, given your background in tech and you being an almost full-time translator now, I guess, how do you see the world in which translators use AI and all of the technology we have to improve their translation?
I
And yeah, what's the big vision there?
Right. So I'm not a full-time translator. I still work.
Yeah.
In fact, I just this year I reduced my work time to 50% at Waterloo, but then I took up visiting appointments in a couple of other places. So I'm effectively working full-time in my day job. Translation is really a passion project for me. And like the last 2 weeks, I translated a lot because it's been holidays, right? So during regular semester time, this will slow down. But again, I tell people that this is like therapy for me. Translating gives me a lot of satisfaction. I also translate in both directions. So I've also translated works by Sri Lankan writers in English into Tamil because that's another word that has been closed off. And you may have heard of people like V.V. Ganeshanandan, who is a young American writer who has won a number of awards, like the Women's Fiction Award and so on. So I recently translated her stories. So in that direction, AI currently is of no help because um, the quality of Tamil text produced by frontier AI models isn't really up to scratch. In the reverse direction, when I translate from Tamil to English, I mean, nowadays you can actually give a PDF with the Tamil story to a modern large language model and it'll produce a translation. But it misses a lot of the nuances, right? It doesn't, these models are not trained with corpora that has enough, that have enough examples of local dialect and local usage. So quite a lot of those nuances will be missed. So by and large, any sort of vanilla text from Tamil to English is reasonably okay, but anything that has some sort of subtlety and nuance will be lost. And quite often short stories have these. So what I do is I translate to English, and sometimes, in fact, on ChatGPT, I have a prompt that is public where I ask the model to suggest minor tweaks that will make the language easier to understand and less ambiguous and so on. And sometimes I use that. I translate a paragraph, then I ask the latest GPT model to suggest minor tweaks. That's the extent of my use of AI. Earlier, I had also tried to use AI to illustrate the story because when I have the story on my website and I want to share it on some social media, as you know, they always look for some sort of an image preview. And if there's no image preview, then the message that gets posted on Blue Sky or X or Facebook is just text. And since usually there is no image in the original stories that I translate, and I can't really draw, so I've been asking AI to do that. And sometimes those images are good, but over time I've noticed that they have the same sort of style and look and feel. And that's not surprising because I think eventually it became clearer that when you ask a frontier model to produce an image, they hardly ever start from scratch. They start from some intermediate image that other users have generated, and then based on some distance of your prompt and other prompts that other people have used, it would start from some intermediate image. That has a whole host of privacy issues and confidentiality issues, but leaving that aside, it meant that most of those images that I was generating, they look the same. So recently I've stopped doing that, not entirely. Sometimes when I don't have a choice, I do use the one of the AI models to generate an image. Otherwise, I try to look for some publicly available image under common Creative Commons license or something like that. Also, many of the younger authors that I translate have very strong opinions about use of AI. In fact, I translated a story by a top science fiction writer from Sri Lanka who won the I believe he won the Hugo Award, which is the top award for speculative fiction. And he was so happy that I translated his story into Tamil, but he made it very clear to me that I should not use any AI generated image if I would like him to sort of amplify this news about this translation. So out of respect to their wishes as well, I've tried to avoid using AI for illustrating the stories.
So Tamil, in particular, is such a rich language, and there are so many nuances to it. So how do you effectively like translate that to English? Like, how do you find the right words for it? I know you said you do use AI to a certain extent sometimes, but what sort of workflow do you have for translating? And yeah, how can that help? translators
Right.
in today's world.
So AI hasn't really been very useful in sort of looking for equivalent words, but surprisingly, Google search is. So quite often, if there is a word, I mean, for most regular words, I would know what the English equivalent would be. But for some rare or sort of regional dialect words or things like that, I may not know the right answer immediately. And this is like, I think, one of the privileges of translating in 2026 as opposed to, I don't know, even 15 years ago. I could Google for a phrase and I see examples that other people have used. And even if it might not give me a direct translation right away, uh, the hints I get from how other people have used this word is usually enough for me to sort of arrive at a suitable translation. Having said that, it's actually always difficult to find sort of a perfect match. For example, I told you that I translated a story by this Eastern Muslim writer, and he uses the Eastern dialect, which is I've had to ask people for help, people from with that background for help. So quite a few of his stories are in very colloquial, like all the conversations are in Eastern Sri Lankan colloquial dialect. I didn't try to make it colloquial in English, so I write it in sort of normal English. I try to retain the semantics, but in these cases, I sort of give up on capturing this dimension, which is conveyed by the use of local dialects. Another example would be a story that's told from the point of view of a little girl, like a 9-year-old girl, and then she would use language that is that you would expect a 9-year-old girl to use. And again, in that case, I made a conscious decision not to try to mimic a 9-year-old speaking in English, but rather use simple enough words. I avoided using any complex words, but it could be like even if an adult was saying those sentences, they may have used similar words. So those are sort of choices that I made that I didn't try to capture exactly as they are, but try to retain the semantics and also the spirit, but not 100% of the original author.
Got it. Yeah. And that's amazing. Yeah, I know you have reiterated over this, but and yeah, that was my next question. It was like cultural context. How does translation sort of provide that cultural context to the diaspora today who did not, like you said, grow up with those stories around them?
Right. I mean, it's actually the other way around. I think the kids in the diaspora, they do understand the cultural context because they hear it from their parents and in family gatherings and so on. What they don't have is the language, the ability to read that uh, in uh, in text. So, in fact, all the translations I have done. So, I'm not a professional translator, right? I'm a technologist. What I know is I'm reasonably fluent in English and Tamil, but I understand the context in which the stories that I've chosen are done. So, for example, initially I started translating stories by Sri Lankan writers from the north of Sri Lanka because that's where my parents are from. That's why I spent a few years of my childhood. I have translated science fiction stories because I actually learned things. I told you that in Sri Lanka we study in Tamil. So as a teenager, I needed to become proficient in English, and I did that by reading science fiction stories because one of the best science fiction writers of the generation before us, Arthur C. Clarke, happened to live in Sri Lanka. So you heard about him all the time. So I was sort of naturally drawn to this. So during a period like in my teens and early 20s, I read a lot of science fiction. So I feel that I have, even though I'm not a professional translator, I have an extra sort of a qualification to translate stories like this, Sri Lankan science fiction stories or stories about the north of Sri Lanka, because I understand the context and I can miss things that a professional translator who is not from that background might miss. I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm translating in the other direction from English to Tamil. Stories by a writer called Alagu Subramanian. Alagu Subramanian used to live in Jaffna in the late 50s. And he used to live in front of a girls' school, which is called Wormbadi. Everybody in the north of Sri Lanka knows this Wormbadi girls' school. Wormbu is the neem tree. So Wormbadi is the name for the school that is next to the neem tree. So in his stories, he he had talks about a school, and in English he calls that school the Tamarind School. And immediately I know that what he meant was Puliadi, because tamarind is puli, and he wants to use the same. So it's like a little dig on the name, Vembadi, and instead of Vembadi, he wants to use Puliadi. But in English, he can't use the word adi, so he just says a tamarind school. So when I translate it, I will translate it as Puliadi because I know the context. Whereas an expert Tamil translator from some other part of the world might not know this, because they might not know that there's a school called Vembadi that everybody in the north of Sri Lanka know about. So those are the things that I think justify that I can translate, because even though I'm not a professional translator, I sort of dare to translate stories where I have a little bit of an advantage in terms of understanding the context, which is very important. Like you said, without knowing the context, you might lose the spirit of the translation. And both AI and people who are who have expertise in both languages but lack the context will miss those subtle cues.
God, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And so do you think like translating all of this work would probably help more people learn their native languages better?
That's possible. I mean, this is one of the things that you told me about your work and the people that you're working with. Once there is this sort of paired corpus of Tamil and English, that can help you to build models that can help people learn in either direction, right? So, for example, learning Tamil, eventually there will be tools to learn mainstream Tamil. But if somebody wants to learn the Tamil dialect of Jaffna, there aren't enough paired corpora that you could train a model on, right? So the stories that I've been translating could give this possibility.
What is your favorite story that you've translated? And how do you think you were able to like effectively tell the story out to the world with your translation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, like I said, I love the stories that I translate because I also lived through these experiences. But perhaps I have a soft spot for an author called Shobha Sakti, who's actually sort of, I think he's a couple of years younger than me. And he came of age. So our generation is the first generation that came of age during the war. So in the early 80s. So I was in university in the early 80s. I think he was just finishing high school in early 80s, and the war hit us really badly, right? So we scattered all over the place. Many of my classmates and people in my age group, they made drastic choices, and many of them, either they were killed by the army or they went and joined the militants. And he was one such person who I think as a 16 or 17 year or 15 or 16-year-old, he went and joined the Tigers. He fought with them for a few years, and he became disillusioned and fled the Tigers and sought asylum in France. And he wrote a lot of stories about his experience as a Tiger fighter, his experience during the Civil War, and he writes this both with sort of first-hand experience, but also he's from a sort of relatively underprivileged background, unlike many other Tamil writers in Sri Lanka who are middle class, upper middle class, from affluent backgrounds. So his stories contain this authenticity that you wouldn't find in many other authors. And because he writes about experiences that were very real to me at that time, I identify with those stories very well. And I see that sort of catches on. So two of his stories have now been published. Translations of his stories have been published in North American Literary Magazine. One was published in a magazine called Lunch Ticket, which is from Antioch University in Los Angeles, I think. And then the second one is going to come out in a magazine called Copernical, which is from, I think, the University of Denver. And the reaction I saw in the editors of both of them when they read the stories, they were so positive. And I think that's a testament to the authenticity of the original story. Not so much my translation, but I think the original stories are so powerful, so well told, with humor and a keen eye for what went on, and then with also balance. I mean, even though he was a former Tiger fighter, his stories are not biased in one way or the other. He can write with sort of compassion for the other side in the war. And it's gratifying to see complete strangers, like these are American editors of American journals, loving these translations. So if I have to pick one, I would pick his stories, and in particular the one that's going to come out in Copernical. It's called The Gold Line, and it's about the line of control between the Tigers and the army, and what happened when a man from the Tamil side meets a man from the Sinhalese side in a temple in this no man's land, and how they interact. They both come there with the baggage that has been sort of imposed on them by propaganda and so on. But then they also connect, they share bread and so on. So they connect because of their humanity and their shared hunger and so on. And it's such a beautiful story. So if I have to pick one, I would pick that.
Uh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that this was great. Like I said again, there was so much that was covered, and I think we have like all of our snippets that we need. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Ashokan. Again, this was great. I think there were so many valuable insights we have for the world of translation and why it's so important to bring South Asian literature out to the world through translation. This is Samyukta at LIPI, and again, this is Professor Ashokan from the University of Waterloo. At LIPI Library, we're trying to support translation of South Asian literature, and this was just an amazing opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you, Samyukta. And it was a pleasure talking to you. And I think I was so excited when I heard about your LIPI Library project. And I'm happy to be able to support that in a small way. And I'm really looking forward to seeing those stories and sharing it with
For
others.
sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Check out the best of Indian literature in translation at lipilibrary.com. This episode was produced by Azania Patel. LIPI Library is supported by Equitech Futures.